The Catechism speaks about human freedom, remembering that God creates man in His image and likeness. Male and female, He created them, and God endows every human person with the divine spark from the moment of conception. God gives to every person the faculties of intellect and will so that that person might make wise moral decisions. God willed that man should be left in the hand of his own counsel so that he might of his own accord seek his Creator and freely attain his full and blessed perfection by cleaving to Him. The Catechism speaks about freedom and responsibility, noting that freedom is a great gift of God. God gives us free will, and with that gift come responsibilities. Freedom is the power rooted in reason and will to perform deliberate actions on one's own responsibility. By free will, one shapes one's own life. Freedom attains its perfection when directed toward God, our beatitude. In this life, there is always the possibility of choosing between good and evil, and therefore the possibility of an increase of perfection or of sin. The more one does what is good, the freer one becomes. There is no true freedom except in the service of what is good and just. The choice to disobey and do evil is an abuse of freedom and leads to the slavery of sin. Freedom does not mean licentiousness. Freedom does not mean doing whatever we please. Freedom is the capacity to do what is right, what is good, what is noble and holy and true. Freedom is the power that makes a person responsible for his or her actions to the extent that they are voluntary. Progress in virtue, knowledge of the good, and self-denial enhance the mastery of the will over its acts. Imputability and responsibility for an action can be diminished or even nullified by ignorance, inadvertence, duress, fear, habit, inordinate attachments, and other psychological or social factors. Every act directly willed is imputable to its author. An act that follows from negligence about what one should have known or done is regarded as indirectly voluntary. A bad effect can be tolerated without being willed, and a bad effect is not imputable if it was not willed, either as an end or as a means of an action. But a bad effect is imputable when it is foreseeable and when the moral agent has the possibility of avoiding it. In regard to moral actions, we cannot say simply that ignorance is bliss, and if we are not aware of the consequences of an action or even the licetiety of an action, that therefore we are innocent. It doesn't work that way. We have a responsibility to inform our conscience as to what is right and what is wrong. Every human person created in the image of God has the natural right to be recognized as a free and responsible being. The right to the exercise of freedom is an inalienable requirement of the dignity of the human person. This right must be recognized and protected by civil authority within the limits of the common good and public order. Human freedom plays an important role in the economy of salvation. The Catechism speaks about how human freedom comes to play in God's plan for our salvation. Man's freedom is limited and fallible. The reality of sin, including original sin, bears witness to this reality. By freely sinning, refusing God's plan of love, man deceived himself and became a slave to sin. From its outset, human history attests to the wretchedness and oppression born of the human heart in consequence of the abuse of freedom. There are many threats to freedom. Freedom is not the right to do or say everything. Man is not an individual who is fully self-sufficient and whose finality is the satisfaction of his own interests in the enjoyment of earthly goods. Economic, social, political, and cultural conditions needed for a just exercise of freedom are too often disregarded or violated, involving the strong as well as the weak in the temptation to sin against charity. In violating the moral law, one violates his own freedom, becomes imprisoned within himself, disrupts neighborly fellowship, and rebels against divine truth. But Jesus Christ redeems men from sin, that which held them in bondage. Jesus liberates us. He sets us free by his glorious cross. In him do we experience the freedom of the children of God. By grace we are set free. The grace of Christ given on the cross does not diminish our freedom, but rather causes us to experience an increase in true freedom. The grace of Christ grants us the ability to accomplish the will of God, which is by its very nature the definition of freedom. The more docile we are to the prompting of grace, the more we grow in inner freedom and confidence during trials, such as those we face in the pressures and constraints of the outer world. By the working of grace, the Holy Spirit educates us in spiritual freedom in order to make us free collaborators in his work in the church and in the world.